After a victory, Republicans are getting ready for the next battle over health care in America, and it won't be easy. With one Republican senator saying it has zero chance of moving forward, others in his party forecasting a bumpy road ahead. We'll get updates from Capitol Hill and the White House. And when Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace joins me, I'll ask him how people will feel the changes proposed so far. Great news for the job market. Unemployment just hit its lowest level in a decade. What it means for our economy and your money. Are two of the planet's most dangerous nations about to join forces? Pentagon officials say they have concerns about a connection between Iran and North Korea. And who's trying to kill North Korea's Kim Jong-un? The assassination accusations. It's Friday. Time for the news. I'm Harris Faulkner, in today for Shepard Smith. You might call it a healthcare hangover. Some bracing for changes to a Republican healthcare bill that's just barely a day old. It's headed to the Senate, as you know, and White House Press Secretary or Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said the president expects changes but wants the main pillars of the law to remain the same. Some Republican senators have announced they're not going to support the measure without major adjustments. And as we watched together yesterday on Fox News, the White House celebrated the vote with House Republicans at a news conference at the Rose Garden. The House passed the measure 217 to 213. Reporters who were at the Capitol building said they noticed somebody wheeling out cases of beer through the halls. Now, some Republican senators say it could get bumpy, as I mentioned. The chairman of the Senate Health Committee, Lamar Alexander, said, "We'll be writing our own bill." He says the Senate could use the House measure as a resource for ideas. Some moderate Republican senators have criticized one of the plan's major provisions for rolling back the expansion of Medicaid under Obamacare. But conservative senators say it doesn't go far enough to replace Obamacare. Of course, it works this way. So the House passed it. The Senate will get to do its own dance. If changes are made, it goes back to the House for approval. Even so, President Trump declared victory on Twitter today. Big win in the House, very exciting. But when everything comes together with the inclusion of Phase 2, we will truly have great health care. And last night, hours after the vote, he tweeted, "It was a great day for the United States of America. This is a great plan that is a repeal and replace of Obamacare. Make no mistake about it." Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live for us outside the White House, obviously. Good to see you, John.
Good to see you as well, Harris. There's obviously, too, a Phase 3 that the president didn't talk about in that tweet because he's trying to take this kind of a bite at a time. He got Phase 1 through the House. Now he's looking ahead to Phase 2 in the House, but also needs to get Phase 1 through the Senate. Yesterday, as you pointed out, was all about the celebration, but today is all about where this process is going to go next. The president optimistic that he'll be able to get this thing through the Senate, but the big question is, what is it going to look like when it eventually gets through the Senate? Because there are some people on the Republican side who are saying, you know what, like what the House did, that was all well and good, but we're going to do our own bill. We're going to start from scratch on all of that. At the briefing just a short time ago, I asked the principal deputy secretary, who is making her debut publicly at the podium, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, about all that. Listen here.
The process of getting the American Health Care Act through the Senate, there's some talk that they may have to go back to the drawing board. As you know, it was an awfully heavy lift getting the AHCA through the House. Does the president expect that the process in the Senate could be even more difficult?
I think that the one thing that you can be sure of is to never underestimate this president. I think he's shown time and time again when he's committed to something, it's going to get done. He's made no secret he's committed to reforming the health care system. You're going to see that process take place.
And the main pillars that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was talking about, they were an absolute for the president, is quality health care, access to health care, and a lower price and more consistency than we've seen in Obamacare, Harris.
Well, I know one thing people have said that they're waiting to see as we enter the next phase is that idea of being able to go across state lines for your health care. So we'll watch for that. What did the White House have to say today about how the bill handles people with pre-existing conditions?
You know, this is a big question that a lot of critics of this bill have, that because the way that it was crafted, it allows the states to seek a waiver from the mandates of essential health benefits and pre-existing conditions. The president has said on repeated occasions that it absolutely has to cover pre-existing conditions. The people who already have an illness have to have the access to health care. And that's one of the reasons why Congressman Fred Upton of Michigan and Congressman Billy Long of Missouri came to the White House the other day, because they shared those same concerns. They came up with a plan that would would designate a pot of money toward premium support for people with pre-existing conditions. Again, Sarah Huckabee Sanders on that point.
One of the biggest priorities of this health care plan and this health care bill, particularly for the president, was ensuring that people with pre-existing conditions were protected. The final bill added an additional $8 billion to go a step further.
Big question, though, as to whether or not that $8 billion will be enough to cover all the people that have pre-existing conditions. The White House suggesting, Harris, that the number of people that would have to go into premium support could be very, very small compared to the overall population.
All right. Hey, you know what? I want you to stay right where you are because we want more from John Roberts. The Labor Department says the jobless rate hit the lowest point in a decade last month. The Fed say unemployment was 4.4% in April. That's down 1/10 of a percentage point from March, and it's the lowest rate since May 2007. U.S. employers added 211,000 jobs in April, better than analysts had predicted. We're going in the right direction, economists say. The current pace of job growth right now could eventually mean bigger paychecks for a lot of people. On the big wall, a look at the unemployment numbers for the past decade. Economists say employers have added jobs every month since October 2010. Now let's get back to John Roberts. We're talking economy this time outside the White House. John?
And this is a big change, Harris, from the jobless numbers that we saw, or the jobs numbers that we saw back in March, and as well the first quarter GDP. First quarter GDP was less than 1%. It was at about 0.7%. The White House didn't have a whole lot to say about that. But, then again, they did not blame the Obama administration for leaving them with anemic GDP growth in the first quarter. All they said was, we believe that this president has set the conditions for there to be robust job and economic growth going forward. And now you've got those April numbers showing 211,000 people got new jobs over that month, and that the unemployment rate ticked down to 4.4%, which is a new low. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked about that at the briefing a short time ago. Here's what she said.
We saw from the very beginning, the minute that the president was actually elected, even before he took office, you saw consumer confidence go up. We've had meetings with countless CEOs, small business owners, people that are involved in job creation come in and tell us that they are much more confident in going out and hiring people, building their businesses, and growing the economy.
So the jobs numbers did beat expectations. 185,000 jobs created was what was expected. You got 211,000. You've got unemployment down to 4.4%. But at the same time that jobs created are up and the jobless rate is going down, the labor participation rate also dropped a little tiny bit. It was 63%. It's now down to 62.9%, Harris.
John Roberts, and we got a twofer from you today. We're grateful for it on this Friday. Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
You too. As we reported, the House GOP health care bill is getting some major pushback now from Republican senators. I mentioned one of them said the current bill has zero chance of passing in the Senate the way it is. That's Tennessee Senator Bob Corker. He said senators will have to make some major changes before they can pass it. Well, that's kind of how it works here. Some other key Republicans have said the Senate will write its own bill. The number 2 Republican in the chamber says he won't set a timeline at all. He says they'll do what they have to do when they have to do it, and they'll pass it when they have the votes to pass it. Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill for us. Mike?
Harris, good afternoon. Senators are essentially saying to the House, thanks very much, and that they look forward to working on this major issue, health care. Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham are among those asking for an analysis from the Congressional Budget Office about the potential cost and impact of the House bill. Others are already talking about looking at making improvements.
So that's going to need more work. And in fact, I'm working with John Thune on an amendment to address that right now. Medicaid. We need to make sure that it works for the states that took the Medicaid expansion. So there's more work to be done on the Medicaid piece as well.
Ohio Senator Rob Portman not pulling any punches, saying he has serious issues with the House bill, saying, quote, I've already made clear that I don't support the House bill as currently constructed because I continue to have concerns that this bill does not do enough to protect Ohio's Medicaid expansion population, especially those who are receiving treatment for heroin and prescription drug abuse. There are 52 Republicans in the Senate. They need a simple majority to pass it. So Portman and just about everybody else are really important, Harris.
Yeah, you know what? The American public, though, that voted like single issue on this is kind of anticipating that this is how it works, right? They're going to go around and make some changes. The people we're not talking about very much, though, are the Democrats and all that bipartisanship that they talked about was possible in all of this. I'm curious to see how that will work out. What is next actually in the Senate?
Well, bottom line, those who have been talking about health care, I'm told they've been talking for months on the Senate side about what they would do when they get a potential bill from the House of Representatives. And those who've been involved in those talks say they're essentially looking forward to getting cracking.
We'll move ahead with deliberate speed. We're doing that because exchanges are collapsing. People could be without insurance. Premiums will go up if we don't act. But we want to get it right. There will be no artificial deadlines. We'll carefully consider the legislation passed by the House.
We've heard Democrats talk about improving Obamacare. A few Democrats sound like they're willing to sit around the table and talk with Republicans about improvement, if not quite repeal and replacement of Obamacare.
It's important to get it into the Senate. If we take health care seriously, we'll put the bill in the committees. We'll get the CBO information about it. We'll bring stakeholders in like the American Cancer Society, hospitals, doctors to talk to us what they think. And then we'll embark on a committee process to try to make it better.
So far, senators are saying there is no timeline. They do not want to set an artificial deadline. Harris?
Yeah, I just hearken back to President Obama wanting to change his own legislation, upwards of 30 times, and doing so by executive order, I think. I remember some of that he didn't even try to go to his own people. Let's see if they can genuinely come to the table, as you put it. Mike Emanuel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Standing by now to join me, Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace. We'll talk changes for Americans who have those pre-existing conditions. I've asked our team to give me a list. The list is long, and what that could look like with some of the current changes that are in the proposal. Republicans also, who could stand in the way of the health care situation in the Senate. Forget about the Democrats for right now. Remember Ted Cruz, Rand Paul? Their issue is you got to totally repeal it. Remember the words grandstand. We'll talk about that too. Stay close.
Naomi Campbell, thanks for stepping into the Fox light. You look amazing as always.
Never been here before.
Oh, we're delighted. We've never had an icon here before, Naomi Campbell.
Thank you for
So
having
let's
me.
talk Star. Big episode tonight. Tell us a little bit about your character and what's going on right now.
Basically, I'm the mother of Alexandra Crane, and Alexandra's gotten herself caught up with this lovely guy next door in Atlanta, which I'm against all of it. My daughter's rebelling big time for how her rock star father, who's played by Lenny Kravitz, and her fashionable, tried to be rock star mother kind of abandoned her as a child.
Why'd you tell those people I was dead? I mean, you might as well be.
That era you came up in the 90s, the supermodel, it was such an era, I don't think it's ever going to be duplicated again.
I love the ladies that I came up with, and we're all still interacting with each other and supportive of each other and proud of each other and what each other does in their lives. I'm really blessed and wouldn't want it to be any other way if I could turn the clocks back.
I just saw on your Twitter you tweeted out a note by Joan Crawford discussing Feud, another great Fox program. Have you watched it?
Aren't you hooked? I'm hooked and obsessed.
Christ, you can't be serious.
There really was a feud.
There really was, and the show gets into really how women were sort of treated and manipulated
in those days.
In those days. What has it like been for you to sort of come up as a woman, sort of like blaze a trail with modeling?
My whole, my whole existence, I feel, has been a challenge. And so I kind of when a challenge comes up, I don't get nervous and chaotic. It feels normal to me. I am a fighter. I am a survivor. And that's how I don't take anything for granted.
Yeah.
I commit to what I get, understand, and want to be pushing for. Whatever it is I say yes to these days.
Thank you for saying yes to coming here tonight.
Oh, no, thank you for having me.
So
I'm happy
great
to meet you. You too.
And we can catch you Wednesday nights on Star.
Thank you.
On Fox.
9 o'clock on Fox.
Do you have a pre-existing condition and you want to keep your health care? What does the House bill say about your current situation? Let's bring in Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace. Chris, it's always good to see you. You know, this is one of the big talkers for Americans out there because they anticipate that, on Washington, they're going to kind of go back and forth with changes. I want to get your view, though, on just what people should be bracing for or ready for.
Well, look, there are going to be some winners and losers. I think there are going to be some people who are going to be better off. Let's make it clear just at the start. This is assuming that the House bill becomes the law. It won't become the law. As you just reported, there are going to be dramatic changes in the Senate. But assuming that what was passed by the House yesterday became the law, there'd be some winners and losers. Young, healthy people would be better off. Their premiums would almost certainly go down. Older people, their premiums almost certainly would go up. And people with pre-existing conditions, it's not at all clear, but I think that they certainly would have more to worry about than under Obamacare, where there was a flat regulation. You could not charge people with pre-existing conditions any more than people who didn't have those conditions.
Interesting. I asked our team here to just get a quick list, and this will vary by state, but lupus, alcohol abuse, Alzheimer's, rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, the list is really very long in pre-existing conditions, and again, could vary by states for the very reasons that you spoke of. I want to give you a last word on that, and then we're going to move on.
Well, look, there's a lot that we don't know in the House bill because of the fact that some states would decide to live by the federal mandates, which will continue to ban any discrimination against people, any higher charges of people with pre-existing conditions. But there are state waivers, so if states can justify to the federal government, they can drop out a lot of these things: pre-existing conditions, essential health benefits. You know, there is this insurance mandate under Obamacare that everything from mental health to maternity care all has to be covered in every insurance policy. But if states decide to take the waiver, they can say, well, we're going to take this part of the essential benefits and we're going to drop these. And an insurance company in Oklahoma can say, well, we're not going to live by the essential benefits in Oklahoma. We're going to take what the essential benefits are in Arizona. So it really is going to be a very different and much more checkered playing field than what you have under Obamacare.
Sure. And then you have those players like Rand Paul, the senators Ted Cruz, and others who have said, no, you've simply got to repeal all of it and start over. You've got some major key people that we need to be watching. You've got Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who doesn't like the Medicaid point. Can you talk to me about those maybe 6 or 7 senators to keep our eye on? And I've enumerated some of them, and what we're watching for.
Well, on the one hand, you've got the hardliners, and I think you pointed out who they are. Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee. They were pretty quiet yesterday. They didn't say that this doesn't go far enough, so it'll be interesting to see where they are. But in the past, they have said they don't want government regulation of health care. And even with this bill, with all the changes, repeal and replace, there's still a lot of government regulation of health care. So it'll be interesting to see how far they're willing to go, or are they going to push for a lot more. On the other hand, you've got more moderate people. For instance, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Rob Portman of
Susan
Ohio.
Collins.
Particularly, say again?
Susan Collins is another one.
Yeah. Well, particularly in states that agreed to the Medicaid expansion, which meant that people who previously hadn't been covered by Medicaid now were because they were above an income level. They're worried that Medicaid expansion is going to be rolled back over the next 4 years if the House bill becomes law. And they have hundreds of thousands of constituents in their states who had health care coverage under Obamacare who would lose it with the rollback of Medicaid expansion. So they're not going to want to see that happen. And, boy, that really gets tough because that was one of the things that absolutely had to happen in the House. Remember, whatever the Senate comes back with, and it's going to be dramatically different than the House, then they have to try to find a way to reconcile in a conference committee the Senate version and the House version. And as we saw, the House version, which is probably more conservative than the Senate version will be, only passed with one extra vote. So anything you do to change the bill changes the balance of power in the House.
So those are potentially Republicans on the bubble. What about Democrats, real quickly? Anybody that you see that could be pulled over?
Well, there's some that are talking about it. John Tester of Montana, some of the other more moderate, even conservative Democrats, particularly those who are facing re-election in states that Donald Trump won, facing re-election in 2018 in the midterms. But, boy, I got to tell you, there hasn't been a Democrat so far who has gone along with this. And yes, I understand that it's hard to oppose the President Trump in a state that he carried if you're a Democrat. On the other hand, it's awfully hard to go along with something called Obamacare repeal and replace if you're a Democrat. You're going to lose a lot of your own voters in your state.
Chris, while you were talking, President Trump apparently tweeted this out. Of course, the Australians have better health care than we do. Everybody does. Obamacare is dead, but our health care will soon be great. This has just gone out. You know, we've been kind of keeping up with him, as we all do, and especially on a Friday afternoon after his deputy press secretary has already spoken to the media, we get new information. I just want to quickly get your response to that before I let you go.
Yeah, well, what this is about is that yesterday in his meeting with the Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, the president said, well, I got to admit, you have better health insurance now than we do, and then went on to say, but ours is going to get better after this repeal and replace. Well, the key there is, and this is what people like Bernie Sanders noted, the Australian plan is single payer, like they have in Britain, like they have in Canada.
Yes.
And they while the president and his people are saying, well, he was just being polite to the prime minister, they're saying, well, yeah, single payer, completely government-run health care is better than any system that we're going to have under Obamacare repeal and replace. So he's now saying, well, not so fast.
Right. And Democrats are saying, wait, did you say single payer? Wow. And around we go. Chris Wallace, I know what I'm doing this weekend. I'm watching you. Thank you, my friend. Chris will have the very latest. Pentagon officials say they have new evidence that North Korea and Iran's militaries are sharing information about their missile programs. Earlier this week, Iran tried and failed to launch a missile from underwater in the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. defense officials say it was apparently the first time Iran attempted to do that, and they say the submarine Iran used in the launch was based on a North Korean design. U.S. officials say missiles Iran launched in January and last summer were also similar to North Korean models. Let's bring in now General Jack Keane, former U.S. Army Vice Chief of Staff and a Fox News military analyst. General, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
How concerned are you about these two in particular getting together, and is this evidence strong in your point of view?
Oh, yeah, overwhelmingly so. This is a 20-plus year close relationship. The Iranians are actually following the North Korean playbook about as close as you possibly can. The North Koreans in the 90s negotiated with us and others, lying to us about their nuclear intentions. Meanwhile, they had secret sites and they were, in fact, developing a nuclear weapon. And then in 2003, they declared that they had it. The Iranians were doing very much the same thing, negotiating with us, telling us that they're only building nuclear power for energy, not for weapons. They had secret sites. What happened in Iran, we found those secret sites because of some informants, and they were exposed. But they follow the exact playbook. Their missiles are exact replicas, by and large, of North Korean missiles. Their nuclear technology is North Korean technology. They both want to have nuclear weapons, to be sure. The Iranians have never given up on that. They both want ballistic missiles, and they want to be able to fire them from the surface and also from the subsurface. And North Korea is leading the technology and engineering effort on all of that.
You know, General, the American public has been told to believe that there are so many imminent threats. You know, first it was the Islamic State savages. Talk to me, if you will, about the urgency now and the talk and the reporting that we're also witnessing in this era about Iran and North Korea.
Well, Iran, I believe, is a major threat in the Middle East, much more so than radical Islamists, who clearly are a threat. We see the evidence of that all the time as they run around the world killing people. But the Iranians are a much more serious threat. They have conventional military, they have missiles, they're developing ballistic missiles, and they want a nuclear weapon. And according to the deal that the previous administration made, they are likely to get nuclear weapons unless this administration puts a stop to it. So, yes, and that is a major concern for us, is the Iranian threat in the Middle East. And obviously the North Korean threat in the Far East and our bases and our allies is also a major threat to us.
Are you confident that President Trump gets this? Because I want to talk with you about the news that he dropped, and that is that he's getting ready to make his first trip as president overseas, and he is, in fact, going to the Middle East, the very place you're talking about right now. How does that inform you about the confidence that you may have in this president moving forward?
Well, first of all, he absolutely gets the danger of both of these threats. All of his national security advisors have been speaking out about these threats. And obviously the president put the military option back on the table and is negotiating with the Chinese. That's all a plus. This trip to the Middle East is a big deal because he is making an unequivocal, loud statement that the Middle East is a priority for me. And he's going to make a statement that I've got Israel's back and I've got the Sunni Arabs back in the Middle East. And we're going to stand up against radical Islam, and we're going to counter the Iranians. That is not the position of the previous administration. That is going to be so very well received in the Middle East by our allies. The Israelis doubted the previous administration's commitment. The Sunnis were absolutely convinced that the United States had moved away from their previous security commitment.
What about the president's authorization of this military to do what it needs to do? I have to let you go quickly, but I can't do so without asking you about that. What is the difference between what we have now and what we previously had?
It's about trust and confidence in our commanders to do things within their conflict area. Let them make the decisions. They don't have to ask permission. They've got the resources. They got the capabilities. They got great troops. Leave them alone. Judge them by their results. Couldn't be better.
All right. General Jack Keane, thank you for joining us on this fine Friday, sir, with your expertise.
Always good talking to you, Harris.
A U.S. Navy SEAL was killed in a fierce gun battle with Islamic terrorists in Somalia. This comes at a time when U.S. forces are in harm's way, as you just heard the general saying, all over the Middle East. President Trump is encouraging more aggressive military action in the region, and we just reported he's going there. He wants to wipe out terrorist organizations. Our political panel, All Talk Military now, will weigh in on the possibilities, the benefits, the danger of the president's strategy. Stay with us.
The power of prevention. Call now to learn more.
A U.S. Navy SEAL was killed fighting Islamic terrorists in Somalia. That's according to Pentagon officials who say 2 other Navy SEALs were hurt as well. We don't know yet their conditions. This happened about 40 miles west of the capital of Mogadishu. Boy, we have history there, don't we? U.S. Africa Command reports American forces were helping Somali troops with an operation against al-Shabaab. That's al-Qaeda's 3rd largest affiliate. U.S. forces say they're trying to prevent the group from plotting terror attacks in that region and against America. President Trump recently gave the Pentagon the green light to go on the offense against al-Shabaab in Somalia. And that means American forces can launch drone strikes and raids, even if they're not in self-defense, reversing the Obama administration policy. So note that. But U.S. commanders say they got the authority to launch yesterday's operation during the Obama administration. An interesting note as well. Leland Vittert is live for us at the Pentagon. Good to see you, Leland.
Well, nice to see you, Harris. Clearly something went very wrong during this overnight raid. The Pentagon is not exactly sure what it was. They were targeting a compound that al-Shabaab had used to launch attacks against Americans and other targets inside Somalia and inside Africa in general. Reuters now reporting from Mogadishu that the real target was Mahab Karati, an al-Shabaab deputy leader who played a key role in an attack on a local university in Kenya that ended up with 150 dead, most of the dead Christians. He had a $5 million bounty on his head. The SEALs were advising a group of Somali soldiers. They flew in via helicopter about 40 miles east of the capital and attacked the compound inside a village. Early during this assault down on the coast is when they took heavy fire and the American died.
We first and foremost want to express our deepest condolences and our deepest appreciation for all of the men and women in the military.
Now, the Pentagon says they still do not know if the mission was a success in terms of kill and capture for the al-Shabaab leader they were looking for. Harris, as you noted, we have a lot of history in Somalia. This is the first American combat death in Somalia since 1993.
Leland, thank you. The political panel is here. Republican strategist Sarah Linty, former director at the National Security Council under Condoleezza Rice and former advisor to Mitt Romney. And Democratic strategist David Tafuri, former foreign policy advisor to President Obama and former State Department official. Good to have you both. I want to start with you, if I can. Sarah, this is interesting because what happened yesterday was actually kind of a leftover in terms of authorization from the Obama administration. But definitely what happens going forward, President Trump is taking a very different tack in places like Somalia.
He is. He's turned military operations, that means tactical operations and combatant command operations, over to the Pentagon to be left to their discretion. And in my humble opinion, this is a good thing. You want, when it comes to difficult tactical operations, I think decisions are best made in the hands of military professionals like Secretary of Defense Mattis. So yes, this is a change of, it's a pivot.
You know, it's interesting, David, that President Obama formerly was often criticized for not being really clear about what his brand of foreign policy was with regard to some of these nations and certainly fighting ISIS and others in that part of the world. You know, we heard him spill out words like JV team very early on. I don't want to go too far down that road, but I want to get your idea now on how much more on point do you think that this current president is, and your opinion on that.
Well, look, this change in approach may be a welcome one. I travel to Iraq frequently. The special forces that we have there who are fighting ISIS in Iraq often chafed about the rules of engagement with a cagey opponent like ISIS that makes all sorts of different changes in strategy. It's good for our warfighters on the ground to have discretion about how they're going to fight back against ISIS and how they're going to defeat ISIS. So that's a positive. I agree with you that President Obama was slow to create a plan for fighting ISIS, but actually, you know, in the last year of his administration, and certainly towards the end of his administration, he was doing a very good job of fighting ISIS. And in fact, he planned the campaign to liberate Mosul. That's going pretty well. We're pretty close to pushing ISIS out of Iraq. They remain in only 2 cities other than Mosul, Hawija and Tal Afar, and we will be successful there. So let's continue that plan. The loosening of rules of engagement can be a positive, but it is also important to have some restrictions on the military to make sure that we don't have civilian deaths. Because if we lose the war of ideology, then we will lose the war against ISIS.
So there was a lot in what you just said that was critical and also in defense of the former president. Let's pop up the current president's words, though, about what you call a loosening and what others see as a broadening in terms of how much he's listening to his generals. If we've got that, we'll read that for our audience now. And this is what
the greatest military in the world, and they've done a job as usual. So we have given them total authorization, and that's what they're doing. And frankly, that's why they've been so successful lately. If you look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and compare that to what's happened over the last 8 years, you'll see there's a tremendous difference.
I love Shep's team. Did you see what they did there? They actually let the president say it instead of me, which is always good. Let's talk a little bit about that authorization now that's different. And Sarah, I want to go back to you because President Obama was often criticized for not listening to his generals. Is President Trump doing that?
Well, I want to just go back to 2013 when there was the chemical weapons attack in Syria, and President Obama's team did not act; they dithered. And what we saw a month ago in Syria was the president making a decision, turning it over to the military, who acted effectively and efficiently, and then they got out. And it was a stellar example of what I think we're going to see, more of what we're going to see under this administration. So I think we saw it play out a month ago, and I think we're going to see it heretofore.
You know, that kind of flies in the face of what you were saying, though, David, because Sarah's making the point that this actually could save lives in terms of military and maybe even civilians. We would hope so, too, because it's much more pinpoint. Get in, get out. Your thoughts?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes of President Obama was not acting in 2013 in Syria. So I agree with her about that. President Trump was right to do the missile strikes that he did a little over a month ago. But it's still confusing what the president's plan is for Syria, and he hasn't really done much to follow up on Syria yet. It's also confusing as to whether his policy is for Assad to step down or not step down. It should be that Assad must step down. So we should be using force in Syria. We are, supposedly sending more troops to Syria, taking the fight to both the Assad regime and to ISIS. But let's see how this is going to go, because so far the president has waffled a little bit on Syria.
Well, you know, it is interesting as we look at the situation with North Korea and around the world. If people think that this president is serious about using firepower, that's one thing that Syria definitely did prove, that he will do it. Sarah and David, thank you very much. We'll bring you back on another day. Appreciate your time on this Friday. North Korean officials, speaking of which, accusing the CIA of plotting with South Korean intelligence to assassinate their dictator Kim Jong-un with some sort of biochemical weapon. According to a statement from the North's Ministry of State Security, agents bribed a North Korean and turned him into a terrorist full of repugnance and revenge against the supreme leadership of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. This comes days after CIA Director Mike Pompeo visited the South Korean capital, and as tensions are rising, as you know, between the North Korea government and the United States. Greg Palcott is live for us in London with more on this. Greg?
Hi, Harris. Yeah, it's pretty far-fetched, but if it had happened, we would have had a front-row seat. According to North Korean state media today, Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, was supposed to have been targeted at a military parade last month, which we attended. Now, according to the story, the CIA and its South Korean counterpart was supposed to turn a North Korean fellow while he was abroad, pay him off, gear him up with a satellite communication device, and then arm him with a dirty bomb, maybe containing some radioactive material, and then kill the leader at this very public event. We spoke with a spokesperson for the CIA. They declined to comment on the report. We spoke to an expert. He said basically it's misinformation. It's all propaganda. We can tell you security was pretty tight at that event. And it's not completely outlandish. We have seen reports of U.S. military exercises that they call the decapitation of the regime, that is, practicing to go into Pyongyang and do something like this. Also, the experts say that probably the best way for the regime to fall might be an internal coup, probably why Kim Jong-un is perhaps so ruthless and maybe, according to this report, a little bit paranoid. Back to you, Harris.
Greg Palcott, thank you very much. The notorious drug lord El Chapo is complaining about hallucinations and the exercise bike while he's imprisoned. Boy, first world problems, right? We're coming right back.